Good afternoon. Good afternoon from Spain. Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. Welcome to all of you. This webinar is going to talk about the Familia Torres sustainability strategy, which is called Torres on Earth. And I hope you will enjoy it and hopefully learn something from it. So let's start. My name is Josep Ribas. I'm the Sustainability Director at Familia Torres, and very happy to share with you this presentation today. So to put in context our sustainability strategy, we have to start with the effects of climate change and how do we perceive it. The fact is, the last decades we have experienced that the temperature has been increasing, especially in our own meteorological mechanisms or instruments. We have perceived that this temperature has increased by more than 1 degree. Now we hear that in Catalonia, in our region, the temperature has increased more than 1.5 degrees since 1970s. So this is happening, that's the global warming, and it has some consequences, not just that a warmer period is coming, but also this increase in the mean temperature, it brings more frequent extreme phenomena. And these are affecting very much our vines, like heat waves, hail and frost, things that we were not seeing that often, and that nowadays they happen more frequently, and even sometimes they happen when we were not expecting them. And besides that, the fact of increasing this mean temperature, it advances the maturation, the alcoholic maturation of the vines, forcing the harvesting season to take place earlier. And this is something we have to cope with. So knowing all these impacts of climate change, and well, long before that, I believe we were all perceiving that something was happening. In our case, in Familia Torres' case, we are a family-owned company. At the fourth generation of Familia Torres is our president, and he's directly in charge of our department of sustainability. And the fourth generation is currently the general manager. And talking about the president, Mr. Torres, he watched this movie from Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth, in 2008, and he realized that climate change was going to become a big problem, a big threat for our own business and for the entire society. And that's why he decided to establish a sustainability strategy called Torres on Earth. Torres on Earth is not just a nice name, it's a strong commitment. Translated into numbers, this means that we are investing 11% of our net profit into climate change related initiatives. And not only that, we, from the very beginning, set very ambitious targets. First one of them was to reduce by 30% our greenhouse gas emissions in 2020. And happily, we have achieved this target. Last year, we reduced by 34% our greenhouse gas emissions per bottle. And this has made us fix other more ambitious targets for the future. More specifically, a reduction of 60% by 2030 and becoming net zero no later than 2050. I just want to underline the concept of net zero. Net zero means to reduce emissions as much as we can. And then if we have to offset something, offset it. But it puts the stress on reducing emissions. This Torres on Earth strategy is mainly based on greenhouse gas emissions. And in order to build this strategy, first we need to know which is our current impact regarding greenhouse gas emissions. And how to account for these emissions is very important. We need to take into account that we have direct and indirect emissions. And in order to know what is the actual impact of our activity, we need to take into account scopes 1, 2, and 3. This gives us the big picture of our activity, taking into account not only the fossil fuels we are burning, but also the electricity we're buying, scope 2, and all the material we are also buying from material and services from our suppliers. Either the raw materials or the auxiliary materials like glass bottles, cardboard, but also logistics, the end-of-life use of the bottles, and so on. Once being done so, we have an image of our emissions, and we can say that more than more than 80% of our emissions come from scope 3, from our suppliers. You see here on the right side of the slide this donut chart, and on the bottom we see some of the categories included in scope 3 and their weight within our carbon footprint. So the raw material is very important, the use of tractors, fertilizers, and products, and so on. The bottling material has a huge carbon footprint as well, and logistics. And then they would come all the rest of categories that, well, they have a certain impact, but they are smaller. This is a very easy way for us to fix our efforts on these categories that have a bigger impact, right? And last but not least, this emissions inventory that we've been doing since 2008, they have been always verified by Lloyd's Register, which is an external audit firm, and following ISO 14064, which is the international standard that verifies the carbon footprint inventories. So that's very important because this way we are totally confident that the number we are sharing right now, this reduction of 34%, has been verified by an accredited third party, and this way we can communicate it to everyone. So once knowing where should we focus on, let me define you what the Torres and Earth strategy is more concretely. Torres and Earth strategy is based on 4 different pillars: mitigating climate change, adaptation to climate change, which is totally necessary, research and development, and raising awareness. So if we start with mitigation, how can we reduce the emissions that we free out to the atmosphere? Well, the first thing we have to do is to work on ourselves, right? But our first example, this first slide, is dealing with scope 3. As you know, the glass bottles, they have a big impact in our carbon footprint, and therefore since 2008 we've been working very hard with our glass providers and also with our engineering departments in the bottling lines in order to reduce the weight of these bottles while maintaining certain resistance, mechanical resistance, to avoid breaking the bottles in the line. So thanks to that, we have achieved a significant reduction of weight, which is directly translated into a reduction of CO2 emissions, because the less glass we use for the bottles, the less energy we need in the glass manufacturing to melt the glass and form new bottles. But we see that this has a limited, that somehow we are getting to the roof of these efforts. And nowadays we are putting our efforts on reutilization. Reusing glass bottles might be a good solution for the future in order to maintain glass bottles as the main material for wine. And in line with that, we've been participating in this project on the right side of the slide called Rewine, which had a scope within Catalonia, and we tested this reutilization process with our own bottles, and we realized that it has a lot of potential. Bottles can be reutilized, can be cleaned with water, and can be put on the market again, similar to what the brewing industry does for many, many years, and also some little or some wineries as well, they do it, but very, very, very few. Why? Because it's complicated. The wine industry exports a lot of glass, a lot of bottles, and also on the other hand, we have the marketing friends that they want us to create very nice bottles and differ from the rest of the wineries. But we believe that for the entry-level bottles, we should be able to find out a standardized bottle that we could reutilize within the entire sector. Then when it comes to our sellers, and in this case, renewable energy, we have been betting for renewable energy since the very beginning. Since 2008, when we installed our first solar power installation. Nowadays, we have solar panels in all our cellars for self-consumption. We even have some tests on the vines, which might be the future as well. now that we are running out of spaces. Related to renewable energy, one more example, biomass boilers. They work very well to burn forest waste, but also burning waste, burning shoots, right, from the vines. In our case, in Pax del Penedès, our main winery, we have a biomass boiler that is burning dry vines, burning shoots, and then forestal waste. And this way we create hot water for the cellar. But also we have associated to the biomass boiler an absorption machine, which provides us with cooling water thanks to the same steam created in the biomass boiler. And this allows us to reduce a lot the consumption and the dependency on natural gas and also a bit of electricity. And more examples within the Torres and Earth, what we've done in order to reduce the energy consumption in our cellars is to build them from a bioclimatic point of view. The bioclimatic architecture, what makes is to optimize the use of energy. And as you see here on this big picture of the Baltrout cellar, we have this sand that covers the surface of the cellar in order to avoid the irradiation of the sun and then work as a natural isolation. Also, the electrification of cars. We have more than 80% of hybrid cars, and we are switching towards electrical. We have 2 electrical trains for our visitors, and we are also bringing electricity to the fields, testing electrical tractors. We're going to have our first electrical tractor by the end of the year. One more initiative that helps us cope with climate change, mitigate climate change. This is outside the cellar, but it works as well. On the left side hand of the picture of the slide, you see the reforestation we are undertaking in the Chilean Patagonia. We bought a fundo of 4,000 hectares, and we are planting trees. We are planting trees that they are going to absorb CO2 from the air, and they are going to keep it in their trunk and also underneath the soil. This is happening right now. We have planted already 70 hectares. And on the right side, we have an example in Catalonia. When we started the project, and a picture from a week ago on how the situation is nowadays. I must say that the reforestation projects sometimes are criticized because often they are outsourced. We pay somebody or some entity to undertake these projects. But if we do them ourselves, and we have the control of these reforestation projects, we can be sure that they will be a success, like in the picture on the right. I know that sometimes if we outsource these projects and we make a reforestation in a country very far from us and we don't have this control, it can be even worse than what we were expecting at the beginning. So it's important to comment that. One more aspect inside the Torres and Earth strategy is the regenerative viticulture. We are pushing very hard towards this new understanding of viticulture, which has many benefits. One of them to capture CO2 from the atmosphere. And how do we do that? Well, by means of cover crops, by reducing the tillage we do, by applying organic compost, and by reincorporating the pruning shoots. And given the fact that this is a very new concept, we are following the same guidelines that the Torres and Earth from the very beginning we followed, which is a very science-based approach. That's why we are making tests both in Mas La Plana, near our main cellar, also in Jan Leon, together with a research entity, CREAF, with which we are making analytics before and after the implementation of these cover crops, of these different activities. And this is going to help us to increase the soil health and fertility, to increase the water retention, reduce the soil erosion, bring more biodiversity to the vine. So this is something that is going to get more and more important in the future. One specific project that I would like to share with you is what do we do with the CO2 that we are releasing to the atmosphere during the fermentation phase? Well, this next summer, we are going to finish with one of our projects to reutilize the CO2 from the fermentation tanks and to reuse it in the same cellar. You know, it happens that for our deposits to maintain correctly the must and the wine, we insert an inert gas. In fact, it's a blend of nitrogen with CO2, and we buy this CO2 to a gas company, which takes the CO2 from fossil fuels. So why not taking our own CO2 from the grapes to use it as an inertization agent? That's what we are going to do next summer. Other projects we've been doing with this same purpose, and I'm not gonna spend much time on it, but there is methanation. Once we have the CO2, we can transform it into methane. We've tested and it works, just that it's a bit expensive. Fertilization via CO2 for greenhouses, it works, but it's true that the quantity of CO2 used is not a lot. Algae production, which has some pros and cons, and bicarbonation and carbonation that we are very much analyzing. What could we do with these carbonates and bicarbonates once we have created them? So this is something we have to follow up. This is the last slide within the mitigation chapter, let's say, water use. Obviously, we need to make an efficient use of the water, but water is going to be a very, very important issue in the future because of climate change. There is going to be more drought and less water availability. And that's why we're already investing in rainwater ponds to take advantage of water from the rain and use it in our own cellar. This being said, all the water used in our cellar is being treated, and even between 25-35% of it is being reutilized. So we are doing all this and many other little things to try to mitigate climate change, but also we need to adapt. I'm going to talk about adaptation and R&D at the same time, because, well, this is a short presentation, and I'm going to focus on the main points. When we talk about adaptation, we have a very direct example. We are planting vines in places where before it was not possible for the vines to grow. We have two examples in the Pre-Pyrenees in Catalonia at 1,000-meter altitude from the sea, and also at the highest altitude in the Priorat region. These are new scenarios at higher altitude, but we could also go to higher latitudes, and it's happening in Europe. This is going to help us reduce the temperatures and somehow maintain the climate conditions of the vines that we know nowadays. But we're also making tests in our, we have a piece of land in which we are running tests with different planting density, different driving systems. And we've realized that if we let more space between rows, it helps us delay some days maturation, which is what we are looking for. But also if we work on the canopy and we reduce the canopy height, we also gain couple, 3-4 more days of delaying maturation. And there is also one more thing that we are not doing anymore, which is to deleaf. We are not taking away the basal leaves that now they are protecting the grapes from the sun, but that previously we were removing in order to avoid botrytis. Now we prefer to have a little bit of botrytis rather than have our grapes roasted. And then in this slide, it's a very interesting project of recovery of ancestral varieties. Here, what we did was to ask any grape grower if they had in their fields any vine which was looking different to the others. And so we asked them, we encouraged them to send us a picture or send us a sample so we could investigate and identify which variety it was. This project started a long time ago in the early 80s, and now we are finding the results of that, the output. We are having the reward of all that work. This means that we have recovered more than 5 ancestral varieties, and that some of them have even been included in one of our top wines, like Grans Murallas. But we're also making wines of Forcada and also in the Clos Ancestral, a little blend of different ancestral varieties. These are varieties of grapes, of vines that we have recovered, we have made them grown, we have vinified the grapes, and those that they were interesting, we have kept them, we have planted them, and now we're making wine from them. And it looks like some of those are even more easily adapted to these new climate change conditions with higher draft, higher temperatures, and so on. So that's a very good initiative that is going to help us to adapt. And finally, one important pillar of the Torres and Earth strategy is raising awareness. Why? Well, climate change is a global threat, and we need the help of everyone. We need all the sector to work on this direction. Familia Torres, we believe that the wine sector can be a reference within the food sector, or even within the entire world. We feel the consequences of climate change directly because we work on the ground, on the field, and we have the means on how to adapt and mitigate climate change, and also to translate this to the consumers, to make them aware that this is an important matter and that together, grape growers, winemakers, and consumers, we can change things. And well, we participate in many events like that one, and we have annual events with universities, like Universitat de Barcelona. But the example I'm bringing today is International Wineries for Climate Action, and it's also the reason why we are here in this event. IWCA is sponsor of the Wine Spirits Virtual Fair, and we're going to have a seminar just after this one in the other webinar room, and inviting you to take part of this other seminar. But just very briefly, International Wines for Climate Action was co-founded by Familia Torres and Saxon Family Wines, and it is thought as a working group to gather the most committed wineries in the world in what it comes to climate change commitment or climate change fight commitment. So for this reason, we fix some entry requirements to ensure that the wineries that are here, they are seriously committed and they are rigorous, and also always following a very science-based approach. So that's why we ask a verified GHG inventory, verified by a third party. We ask for very strong commitments, like being net zero by 2050, and also having a small percentage of renewable energy and a constant reduction towards these intermediate and long-term targets. So nowadays we are 10 wineries from all over the world. We have from Spain, from the US, from Chile, from Portugal, from New Zealand, from Australia. And we have also received one award until now. But what makes us more proud is to have the Race to Zero initiative having knocked on our door and saying, your initiative is very interesting. We want you to take part of the Race to Zero initiative. This comes from the United Nations, and it intends to gather as many businesses as possible with the same commitment to become net zero by no later than 2050. And IWCA has been the first agro and food industry entity that has participated in Race to Zero. So we are very proud for that. And well, I think I'm going to explain a little bit more on the next webinar. But for you to have like the breaking news or the punchline, I'm just going to say that we're going to have 5 more members before the end of the month, and that we expect to have IWCA growing at a higher speed now, because we are setting a secretariat that's going to be external from any one of us, and it's going to focus our efforts on organizing this structure behind IWCA and making it totally international, and hopefully focusing on the initiatives that are going to help us reduce emissions. So thank you very much. If there is any question, I'm going to be more than happy to answer them. And I also want to invite you to this IWCA stand that we have at the first pavilion as a gold sponsor. And over there, we're going to answer any question you may have, either from Familia Torres or any of the members within IWCA, and also about IWCA. So thank you very much.